Yeah. Well, he might have to in order to get
what he wants.
Get what he wants. Okay, we are live. Hey, everyone. This is the Prospect Weekly Roundup. New format today. We're doing it live. We have Luke Goldstein in studio. The writing fellow of the Prospect. I'm David Dayen, executive editor, and welcome. You're from LA, so
you're hometown.
Yeah, you're not far from here.
No, visiting family.
That's great. That's great. So yeah, we're gonna blow it out. The last time I did the weekly roundup was before Trump got shot. So there've been a few developments, or maybe got shot. Right? We don't actually know. He might have been hit with shrapnel. But anyway, so. Obviously, the big story in the Democratic side of the equation is Kamala Harris, now the presumptive nominee of the party. So yeah, I mean, the first question I have to ask as someone of your age and experience, is Kamala Harris Brad? Is the question.
Yeah, I thought this might be coming. Yeah. I don't even know if I'm the best person to ask, but I can explain the reference at least for some of our listeners.
It's a musical reference.
Yeah, right? Big pop star, Charlie XCX.
Right, yes. Yeah. And then
hit album of the summer, Brad.
Right. So, I mean, I remember in 2008 when kind of all the Republicans had on Obama was that they charged him with being a celebrity.
Right.
The argument was he's too popular.
Yeah.
So
tapped into the culture.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's typically a problem for Republicans. And
I guess the updated criticism is too online now.
Right.
That's
you're too extreme. Too extremely online.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's not everything we cover here at the Prospect.
I think part of it, though.
I think I mean, obviously we are aware of all internet traditions.
Hip to the culture.
I think the main thing that we've been going through over the last week on the website is the fact that this is a presidential candidate that we know the least about of any presidential candidate probably in 100 years. You have to go back to probably Calvin Coolidge to find someone that America knew less about in terms of what they wanted to get out of the presidency. And part of that is obviously because of the quick strike nature of her candidacy.
Yeah.
But another part of it is the fact that she's essentially left her options open throughout her entire political career.
Quite purposefully.
Very purposefully. She was very cautious. As Attorney General, she usually took on cases that were multi-state investigations where she had some cover with, other attorneys general. Her entire Senate career was during the presidency of Donald Trump, when Democrats were in the minority, I should say, in the Senate. She had no ability to pass bills. She took sort of tried on some policies like a suit during her presidential run, and would then immediately, take the other side of her own argument. She,
Medicare for All was
one of the famous ones. The other one was when, her one shining moment in the presidential race, when she attacked Joe Biden over busing. Said, I was someone who was bused as a child. And then they asked her what her actual position was on busing. It was no different than Joe Biden's. So
they had the T-shirts ready, but not quite the policy alternative yet.
Exactly. So, I think what we've spent the last week or so trying to figure out is, who is Kamala Harris? What does she believe? And what is she going to do in office? And you have to make a lot of inferences in order to come up with that. And you've done some of that work by looking at the people she has surrounded herself with and people who are current or former aides. So tell us about that.
Yeah, right. I mean, and just to underscore what you said, I mean, we just try to focus on the policy stakes of elections. That's kind of our thing. And Kamala Harris, in some extent, just because of how unprecedented this situation is, it makes it a little bit harder to do that. And the other challenging thing about writing about, Harris's kind of policy instincts is that one of the big knocks on her is she has just shed so much staff over the last several years, really going back to when she was a senator. So there is, on one hand, not a very close inner circle of advisors that have stuck with her and that you can kind of, gauge what kind of, approach they have to different policy issues.
And on the other hand, it means there are a lot of people out there who are former Kamala Harris staffers. They might have spent a little bit of time there, but there are a lot of formers out there. And what we know is just a fact of life that most people who revolve out of Senate offices or vice presidential offices usually stay in government in some capacity. And that capacity is typically working in the lobbying side of the equation.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a standard thing for a lot of politicians, but just maybe more so even for Harris.
Are you calling up videos here?
I just want to make sure
we should actually put that on online.
We could insert it.
Luke has his laptop here, and we can do inserts like we're.
I'm here to fact checking.
We're like David, the morning zoo.
Yeah.
Right, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of her former advisors who've gone through the proverbial revolving door into the private sector, and you just want to follow these connections because lobbying firms hire former staffers because they have some relationships in offices.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point. The whole point is that I know who who Kamala Harris is, and I know who her chief of staff, and I can get access to them. I mean that's the whole game.
Yeah. And, obviously as a caveat, like it is not any kind of guarantee that it means a politician is going to vote a certain way. But, you want to be aware where their connections are, because there are a lot of cases where this does play an influence. And especially what I focus on here, which is tech policy, where, Harris has a kind of complicated relationship and, a bit of a mixed record that we'll get into.
She comes out of San Francisco. That's where she wins her first campaign as district attorney. She was the home state senator from California. She's the home state attorney general from California, the home of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
It is unmistakable that you're going to have connections to the titans of Silicon Valley if you ascend to that level in politics.
And also that, yes, she comes from Silicon Valley, probably just has deeper ties for that reason. But she really has mirrored a lot of the progressions that the Democratic Party itself has gone through over the past decades regarding, big tech and in some ways antitrust. So, we'll talk about that in a bit. But, so just, for one, again, because of a lack of her inner circle, right before Biden stepped out and she was preparing for her VP debate against J.D. Vance. She had two main advisors who were helping her debate prep. And it kind of raises, some eyebrows. So one of them was Karen Dunn, who is the lead attorney at a big law firm, in DC and New York, Paul Weiss. And one of her accounts, and that Paul Weiss is working on right now, is representing Google in the antitrust trial brought by the Biden and Harris administration and Department of Justice.
And this is just not her law firm is repping Google.
Yeah,
she's the lead trial attorney in that case. This is a case against the Justice Department, which is part of the Biden-Harris administration.
Yeah.
And her advisor for debate prep is fighting the administration that
Currently,
she is a part of.
The case starts in September.
It starts in 6 weeks.
It's going to be on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
And because we have a little bit of time to go into this, it's also a little bit more than just a standard situation with a law firm representing a company on one side against the government. Paul Weiss is where Jonathan Cantor, the head of the DOJ antitrust division, worked for a time representing the rivals to Google. There's not total confirmation about what happened here, but when Karen Dunn arrived at Paul Weiss was when Jonathan Cantor left, and I think it's been very clearly stated that they had some conflicts between the clients that they held.
Absolutely.
And Paul Weiss has been pushing for the entire Biden administration for Cantor to be recused from any dealings related to Google,
including this
case.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've been really at loggerheads here.
Yeah.
So and so it's kind of concerning.
And Dunn isn't the only example, right? So the vice presidential search, which is happening right now, Harris has put this in the hands of Covington and Burling to do the vetting, and particularly Eric Holder. But more broadly, his law firm,
head of
Obama's former attorney general. But Covington and Burling is the lead counsel in Amazon's lawsuit that has been put forward by the Federal Trade Commission. So that's a second one. The third one is that her literal brother-in-law, Tony West, who is following her on the campaign trail, is the chief legal officer at Uber. He was formerly number 3 at the Justice Department under Obama, by the way, but he's currently chief legal officer at Uber, and Uber is part of a coalition that is litigating against the Department of Labor of the Biden-Harris administration over the independent contractor rule that they put together. So that's 3, and you wrote this week about a 4th.
So her former senior counsel when Harris was in the Senate, is this guy Lartice Tippett, and he was with her from the beginning when she got into the Senate, and then left in 2018 to go become an in-house lobbyist for Amazon. Harris was, just to kind of explain how this works, Harris was on the Judiciary Committee, which oversees antitrust issues. This was at a big time of kind of turbulence where there was a lot of scrutiny on big tech. They were really kind of in the crosshairs
coming out of the
Democratic primary.
Coming out of the 2016 election. When it was said that Facebook allowed Russian actors to infiltrate the site, and also there was the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where millions of pieces of personal information were transferred to this private firm, this analyst.
So tech was on everyone's minds if you were a senator, a Democratic senator at least, and especially for Harris because she was on the Judiciary Committee. So Tippett goes to Amazon, and he's working on privacy issues in particular. And then in the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration, 2021, he leaves and goes to a big trade association called the Interactive Advertising Bureau. And that's kind of where my story really starts, because for the entirety of the Biden-Harris administration, he has been really kind of at the lead fighting against a number of rules and other kind of regulatory actions that the FTC
mainly FTC rules, right?
Under Lena Khan.
So for example, there's a rule called the click to cancel rule, which is around subscriptions. We had in our pricing issue, we wrote about this, about subscriptions and the subscription economy, and how it's very hard once you sign up for a subscription to actually cancel it. And this FTC rule would say it has to be just as easy to get out of subscription as it is to get into it. So if there's a 1 click on the website to sign up, there's got to be 1 click on the website to sign off. And IAB is fighting this, and Tiffeth himself is at the head of that.
VP of federal affairs, or some kind of title like
the
that.
lead lobbyist for this trade group.
Whenever the FTC has a public comment period to hear about these rules, IAB has been one of the lead public commenters opposing these rules. The click to cancel one is the current active campaign, because that rule is still hasn't been finalized. It's a jump ball. A lot could change before it's totally wrapped up. It's in the universe of like junk fees. There's termination fees for anything as digital subscription sometimes, but this extends to digital subscriptions you might have, or gym memberships, all of the above. It just seems like something that would be kind of a no-brainer, right? Like people just want to easily cancel memberships, but for companies, it's a lot more convenient to lock people in and maybe keep customers through auto renewals, or just making it cumbersome to end a membership.
And there are other rules that IAB is fighting as well, including surveillance advertising rules. But so that's one side of it. We have this evidence of people that she's either associating herself with now or has in the past that are lobbying against core policies of the administration that she's currently in. That's not determinative. It doesn't mean that she's obviously going to follow the wishes of those former staffers or former or current colleagues, current aides. But it's certainly a data point that we have to think about. And the other data point is this flood of billionaires and tech guys, Wall Street guys. We already know that there is a lot of money flowing into the Harris campaign from Silicon Valley, from Wall Street. And now we're starting to see, in a very ham-fisted way, these very people making certain demands. So let's talk about that.
Reedgate?
We can talk about Reedgate. Yeah, let's talk about Reedgate.
Right. So Reid Hoffman has been a long time, Democratic fundraiser bundler.
Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn. He currently sits on Microsoft's board because Microsoft bought LinkedIn. He also has a venture capital company called Grayscale or Greystoke or something like that. And so, yes, he is a bundler, basically, for Harris. He's been on board with the Biden-Harris campaign. Even when Biden was still running, he donated $7 million to a PAC called Future Forward that already has a spot out about Harris. They're doing a $50 million ad buy on that. He convinced the other Reed, not this Reed, the other Reed, the co-founder of Netflix, Reed Hastings, to donate $7 million of his own, and yet he's doing this like road show with Harris, right? He's doing
a bunch of fundraising tours,
a fundraising tour through Silicon Valley, right? So what happened? Reid Hoffman went on CNN, right?
Goes on CNN. Gives a whole interview trying to, basically hype up the crowd, hype up the super fans for Harris.
Right.
He'd been like not really at the center of the mix of ousting Biden. Also, just to be clear from what we know, he kind of just, I think, goes with what the party had decided.
Yes, but I mean, it's very clear that Reid Hoffman is kind of at the center of this push to moderate the policies of the Democratic Party. So Reid Hoffman is a key funder in Blueprint, which is this centrist pollster outfit that has been flooding kind of inboxes of people like you and me with all kinds of polls saying
Sean McKelvey.
Yes, it is. It is the one that Sean McKelvey was advised
a disgraced
on.
former
Pollster was advising on. Hoffman has this PAC called Mainstream Democrats that it's not as widespread as, say, APACs, PACs, or crypto PACs, but it certainly has been in the mix over the last couple cycles in funding centrist candidates, moderate candidates against progressives in open seats or in other contexts. And so Reid Hoffman is really trying to make himself a player in deciding the ideological direction of the Democratic Party. And so in that context, he goes on CNN and he says what?
He goes on CNN and is asked a bunch of questions, but at one point does, say that he would like to see Harris in, her administration, if she wins, oust Lena Khan from the Federal Trade Commission. This seems to be something he's pushing for.
Right. He said she is waging war on American business.
Yes.
I think was the term.
Yeah. Someone else. There's another shoe was dropped. Barry Dillon, a big kind of Hollywood executive, called her a dope on
while he was
with Andrew Ross
while he was on CNBC in front of the Arc de Triomphe before today's opening ceremonies in France for the Olympics. It was not exactly a hard Scrabble backdrop.
These guys really have to reconsider the backdrops they have. There was Larry Summers one time in front of a resort. I don't even remember.
Like he was talking about resort.
We need to up unemployment to fix inflation or something. There was James Carville who was on like a cruise ship at one point,
Right.
talking about how Biden had to step aside.
Right.
Yeah, because he was too
Yeah,
old.
they're part of the
Yeah.
common clay of the American people.
Yeah.
So yeah, so and there are others, by the way.
Right.
There are more anonymous people. A lot of people won't put their name to it, but there are anonymous donors and bankers who are saying,
Yeah.
you know, this is what should happen. But there, you know, I feel like there's a lot of wishing and hoping going on.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. There's a lot of wish casting. Yeah. Just, and also just to underscore that, like the Financial Times had a piece even from early last year at the beginning of the Biden campaign. Wall Street was already pushing him to try to explicitly oust Lena Khan because she's, you know,
Because
public enemy number one.
Because look, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
He needs money. I mean, whether it was Biden or Harris, they need money to compete. They need to you know, get their share of those dollars. Obviously, you go to where the money is. Even though it should be said that Kamala Harris has raised something like $125 million in the first 3 days of her you know, nascent candidacy. So the idea that you actually need to go to the bundlers and the rich guys and the billionaires to fund this thing, it hasn't totally played out in the early going here, that there actually is a path to fund this on from the people.
Yeah. Right. At a time when there has been just an explosion of grassroots energy around having like a functioning candidate now at the top of at the top of the ticket.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I also just think part of the, you know, the concern in wake of that interview, that interview really blew up. And I think people were, you know, really mad about
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, there were statements. Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren gave me a statement saying obviously she should stay in place. You know, there's been a lot of pushback.
And I think the one kind of, you know, one issue people have raised following that interview is that the Harris campaign didn't immediately throw cold water on this. You would think if one of your fundraisers was making it seem like there was an explicit quid pro quo in a public interview, that they were demanding something behind the scenes in exchange for the money, that, you know, you would want to have a conversation or, you know, just basically, you know, kind of, you know, repudiate that and say that's not how this campaign works.
I think in CNN this morning, there was a line that went something like, we have had no discussions about this.
Yeah.
You know, we're 3 days old and we have had no discussions about this, which wasn't exactly the most ringing endorsement.
Doesn't inspire confidence in particular.
Exactly.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a few things also going on in the backdrop of this. One is that, you know, the big conversation basically until Biden announced he was dropping out was that very high profile people in Silicon Valley have made a pretty clear shift towards the Trump camp.
The libertarian aspect.
But people who hadn't been as open before about and hadn't given as much money to a Republican candidate.
That was during the entirety of the Biden campaign this year. Now that Harris has taken over, it seems like there's a shift back.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's the idea. I think there's some excitement. There was a lot of first concern among a you know, class of Democrats that Silicon Valley was spending so much money for Trump. And I think there is, you know, in their mind, kind of this opportunity now. You have a more exciting candidate and who's a little bit more of a blank slate, you know, at the top of the ticket. And, you know, maybe we can fix the Silicon Valley donor problem.
I mean, that is the thing. Like, it amuses me to see these articles that go into, you know, what's Kamala Harris going to do on climate? And you have all these NGO people say, oh, she's going to be great on climate, because they're trying to get in the administration or they're trying to influence the next
Everyone's
administration.
influence peddling.
And these rich guys are doing the same thing, right? So everybody is sort of projecting their hopes and dreams onto this somewhat blank slate of a candidate. However, the one thing we know that Harris is doing right now is she's trying to show continuity with the past. She's trying to show continuity with the Biden campaign. She has praised him up and down over his record. She's clearly going to run on at least parts of his record. And to do that, and also at the same time, you know, either take out or not repudiate the taking out of someone. And really, it's not just Lena Khan. There's a whole group. There's a whole faction of populists within the government right now who are competent and are providing the Biden-Harris campaign with many of the highlights that they tout out in the world.
And that she has too. She talked about medical debt being a huge issue. The CFPB put out a proposed rule just earlier this year that, you know, is addressing
would eliminate medical debt from credit reports. Yeah.
Right.
And so she
didn't mention that it came from the CFPB, but she's talking about
didn't mention that it came from there, but she talked about it at one of her campaign rallies this week. Rohit Chopra is the director of the CFPB. When he was at the FCC, his top legal advisor was Lena Khan. Yeah. Right. So, you know, you can't separate the one from the other. And there's a whole group of these people who are providing like the best headlines that these guys have. And you're telling me you're going to get rid of them. And, you know, at this point, with the very explicit way in which this has been conducted, you know, I mean, I feel like 15 years ago, the rich donors knew to co-opt the Obama administration in the background, right? Not in broad daylight like this.
Yeah.
It's going to be very hard for Harris to pull the trigger on that now that it's like explicit and it would look very much like a quid pro quo.
No, I've had a lot of people tell me who I've reached out to about this that they think it's actually like a strategic misstep for Reid Hoffman and all these executives that give these public interviews, being, you know, very clear about what their asks are, you know, because it gives, you know, plenty of time for there to be, you know, a pushback by, you know, more kind of grassroots forces.
But it's not just the pushback; it's it's the optics. Are you telling me that Kamala Harris is going to win this race and then immediately go back to what explicitly donors said that they wanted her to do? Like that would be a huge misstep at the beginning of her presidency, and it would kind of cement what I think a lot of people might suspect or be you know, would be comfortable with believing about her.
Right. And again, and just in terms of the optics, I'll throw this in there. We're talking, you know, sort of specifically about, you know, antitrust enforcement and tech. There's a lot of other issues in this race, of course. But, you know, she's now the top of the ticket as, you know, the Trump camp picked JD Vance, who is a very weird character in a lot of ways. And especially weird in that he is, on the one hand, actually praised Lena Khan publicly before, and also was very clearly more or less installed by a lot of these Silicon Valley actors and donors who were really, you know, pushing the Trump camp to pick him. There's a lot of strange stuff.
Yeah, going on. I mean, this is someone who was on a UAW picket line, but also is backed by Elon Musk, who is one of the most anti-union auto people there is, and is being targeted by a UAW campaign, right?
And Peter Thiel is his longest standing kind of, you know,
Peter Thiel, he worked at Peter Thiel's venture capital firm. Peter Thiel had a Wall Street Journal op-ed, the title of which was literally "Competition is for Losers." Yeah. Right. So there's this duality, this yin yang thing going on.
Peter Thiel, not an anti-monopoly guy.
He's a very explicitly pro-monopoly guy.
Yeah, wrote a whole book about it.
Wrote an entire book, 0 to 1. Yeah. It's hard to know what to make of that, and I think there's some wish casting going on that side too. Yeah. About, you know, what level he's going to have influence in a Trump administration if that comes to pass, and what this actually signals. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly getting beat up over something that has nothing to do with, you know, tech or monopolies or anything like that. It's over this comment that he made about childless cat ladies. Yeah, and you know, his policies on you know, trying to push people to have children, essentially. Right. That's been the dominant sort of feature in the first week or two of his becoming vice presidential nominee.
Right. And that comment, which has, you know, was not directly about Kamala Harris, but Kamala Harris, who, you know, it doesn't have kids around. She has.
I mean, it was correct. He mentioned Kamala Harris.
Oh,
when he made the comment on Tucker Carlson, he mentioned Harris. He mentioned
Pete Buttigieg,
and
AOC.
And AOC.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And just I think for Harris on tech, because part of my reporting is not just about the revolving door. I did try to look at what she has actually done related to privacy issues and surveillance advertising, to try and figure out what her kind of instinct.
I mean, this goes to a question that we just got in the chat from Margaret. What's it going to take to get Harris to ignore the anti-con faction, and is it possible? So talk about what you've learned on tech, and I have something as well, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think in terms of this question, it's just going to be a matter of, where the biggest opportunity is politically. And again, that's very much where Biden was too, when he came into office.
Right. I mean, if you think about it, Joe Biden was known as the senator from NBNA.
Yeah.
He kind of did the bidding of the credit card industry, which was very popular and powerful in Delaware. And, he even talks to this day about being from the corporate state of Delaware. Yeah. And yet, when he got into office, he has waged, one of the most aggressive anti-monopoly competition policy efforts that we've seen since Lyndon Johnson. And specifically, his CFPB director, Rohit Chopra, has capped rates on late fees on credit cards.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it can happen. There is a difference from when you go from a home state situation and you're the home state senator to when you become a national politician. The cross currents and the pressures are different.
Yeah. Now, just we got a third person in the room. Just to, kind of air this out though. The one difference between Harris and Biden, again, it's like politically some of the upside for Harris, and also policy wise a little concerning. Like, Biden was not at Sean Parker of Facebook executives' wedding day.
Well, that is true. Yes.
Like, when you come up through Silicon Valley in San Francisco, that's
when she interviewed Mark Zuckerberg, in 2018, she was maybe as tough as anybody in Congress on him on that particular topic, which is around Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, she in that hearing in 2018, she really turned on the prosecutor instincts in her. And in terms of antitrust, that is kind of, I think, where she can really thrive as a tough on corporate crime prosecutor.
Right. I mean, she wants to run as a prosecutor. She puts that in a resume. She says, "I'm the one that can handle Trump because I know his type."
Right.
You can't sort of lead with that and then be lenient on corporate crime.
Right.
I mean, she's running on something that actually is a bee in my bonnet, which is saying getting tough on the big banks. Right. When nobody was tough on the big banks after the financial crisis, least of all her. Nobody was prosecuted really. She started a mortgage strike force in California that did nothing. She failed to prosecute Steve Mnuchin's bank before he became West Bank before he became Treasury Secretary. But I actually talked, and I'll have this piece out, in a couple of days. She actually, I talked to Katie Porter, and Katie Porter has a particular role in this. When the national mortgage settlement in 2012 was put together, the one thing that Kamala Harris did as Attorney General at that time that was unique was she said, we in California need our own monitor for this settlement, where we need to see that the banks are doing right by the American people, doing right by Californians, and we're going to get our own monitor. And she insisted on that. And the monitor ultimately became Katie Porter, who at that time was a professor at the University of California, Irvine. Mm-hmm. And Porter actually made the best of a bad situation. It was the kind of thing that was similar to what Elizabeth Warren got when she was on the congressional oversight panel of TARP. She had no real responsibilities. She was just supposed to write reports. Same with Porter. She didn't have like a defined role really, but she got involved, talking to the banks, getting involved in individual cases, and getting better results. There were only 83,000 principal reductions, which is really the gold standard of what you want in terms of consumer relief. Coming out of the settlement, Sean Donovan, who was the HUD secretary, said, we're going to do 1 million principal reductions as a result of the settlement. They only did 83,000 in the whole country. But in California, they did 33,000. That was almost 40%, almost 2 in 5 of the principal reductions that were done in California. And a lot of that is because of this monitor system that was set up by Kamala Harris and then executed by Katie Porter. And I talked to her about this, and she said, this only happened because of Harris, that we had this monitorship. I asked her about, all of this talk about, these billionaires who are getting in her face. She said, what I've perceived from Harris is that she'll take meetings, she'll talk to people, she'll hear them out, and then she won't really consider them when she decides to do what she wants.
Right.
So that was a good endorsement, I think, from someone who's the only person in Congress who's actually worked for Kamala Harris is Katie Porter.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit relieving to hear her say that, although, she also probably wants to be a surrogate and wants to, maybe would have a role to play in the Harris administration.
Right. Do you know what led to Harris picking Katie Porter?
Yeah, and this will be in the piece. It's a funny story. So Harris gets in, she says, I need this monitor. But she's a year into the attorney general job, and her background is criminal prosecutions, right? It's not consumer protection. So she didn't have like a foot in that world. So she ends up asking a Harvard law professor named Elizabeth Warren, who should I select?
Right.
And Elizabeth Warren says, why don't you ask Katie Porter? She was my student. And she's at UC Irvine. She's in California. So why don't you ask her? And so Porter was put in almost like this Dick Cheney situation where she was asked to give names of who should be the monitor. And she gave a bunch of names, and then she was picked. It's like when Bush said to Cheney, come up with some names for the vice presidency, and then he becomes the vice president, right? So, and as far as I know, that was Harris's choice. That wasn't like Porter angling or anything. But yeah, it actually comes down from Elizabeth Warren all the way to get Katie Porter to that position. So,
no, that's really interesting. Yeah, I didn't know the backstory.
I didn't either until just a couple of days ago. So
no, I mean, I think that in terms of Harris taking meetings from everyone. We have a
question from Jules about Peter Thiel rescinding his support, and I'm assuming she means support for Trump Vance. I think you're actually getting that wrong, Jules. I think it's Elon Musk who said he was going to give $45 million a month. The Wall Street Journal reported that. And then he was asked, I think on a podcast with Jordan Peterson or something, are you going to do that? And he said, no, I never said that. Even though there are tweets where he kind of backed up that reporting.
I didn't understand the story. I was trying to look into it. I saw one of the worst leads of all time. I think what happened is that he was worried that there was a suggestion that he was contributing $45 million to the campaign directly, which you can't do on campaign finance. He's giving you a PAC called America.
But he's still giving to that because he said, I'm not giving.
He already has given some money.
He's given some money, but $45 million a month, maybe not.
He's walking back from that.
Yeah, he's kind of walking back from that. But that's interesting that he's maybe playing this double game. Like, I'm not giving $45 million to Donald Trump. But, maybe you're giving it to a Trump super PAC.
He's giving it to a PAC that's run by a bunch of DeSantis people. I think mainly the answer is we just don't know. I mean,
and that was about Musk. I don't have any I think what Thiel has said is that he's sitting out this presidential campaign.
He's not been active this year.
So I think there wasn't a sort of a contribution to begin with. Now we'll see now that Vance, who Peter Thiel staked in 2022 to get him into the Senate. We'll see now that Vance is the VP nominee, whether Thiel comes back in with financial support. But we don't know just yet in terms of that.
Now, interesting, because he worked for Thiel's venture capital firm. Vance was on a venture capital firm with Ron Klain as well at one point.
That's right.
I'm just throwing this out there. It's interesting how these circles overlap.
It's true. And when he decided to go into the Senate race, Klain, there's a tweet where Klain says, "We're really sorry to lose him. He's a great guy, and he's going to be a great candidate."
So Ron Klain, who's the first chief of staff,
the initial chief of staff for Biden. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
So no, just your comment earlier about how, I think Harris takes a lot of meetings with people and you don't always want to read too much into it. She's come down on different sides of other issues. In other cases, there have been, kind of more consumer tech reform groups who have said, we had a great meeting with her. And then she voted, the opposite.
Right. So it's
on some bills in
that
California.
goes both ways.
Yeah.
That goes both ways, right? So she'll take meetings with anyone, but she's going to make her own decision, and that could be pro-consumer or anti-consumer.
And I think the pattern that I found in my reporting is that she'll say the right things publicly, and it's sometimes a jump ball, like how she's going to vote when, push really comes to shove. There was one bill that she championed in the Senate that was kind of defining for her, that was supposed to crack down on online websites that are accused or investigated of facilitating online sex trafficking.
Yeah,
and there was an issue with the legal immunity that internet companies are granted. It's called Section 230.
Right.
And so, a bunch of companies were really worried that this bill would undermine their legal immunity protections. And, she got the bill passed, but it was very watered down, and it ultimately had the support of the trade.
Yeah, this was Stesta Fosta. And there's a lot of back and forth on that bill specifically. I think Wyden was the originator and initiator of that bill. So yeah, that's interesting. The other one that stands out to me is that at the time when Tony West, her brother-in-law, was chief legal officer of Uber during the 2019 portion of the presidential campaign, she came out in favor of AB5 here in California, which would change the rules around independent contracting to make it so that it would be clear that Uber rideshare drivers were employees of the company. That was then reversed in a ballot measure, which just this week, this California Supreme Court essentially upheld the ballot measure with a caveat that those independent contractors for Uber or other gig companies could collectively bargain.
Right.
So now we're getting full circle.
The whole saga.
That is the whole saga.
And it's not just Tony West. The top consulting firm for Kamala Harris, that was her core nucleus. That was her brain trust before everything collapsed in her presidential campaign in 2020, which is a whole other story. Is this firm SCRB Strategies, which is really, and now it's called Bear Strategies.
Yeah, but it was SCRB at the time,
names.
And SCRB was 4 people who were the key partners. The S is A. Smith. The C is Sean Clegg. Those were probably her closest advisors, political advisors. And the B was LaFonza Butler, who is now the senator from California in Dianne Feinstein's seat.
The interim,
for the next year.
Yeah, and LaFonza Butler is the one at SCRB who had Uber as her account when this whole fight was going down as well, and advising Kamala Harris.
We have another question from Stephanie asking, is there any indication she's moved in a more progressive direction on mass incarceration? And I'll take the other question here from Jules. Will Kamala Harris touch the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States? I'll take the last one first, and then we can talk about the other one. It's actually really interesting because right before he dropped out of the race, Joe Biden, it was leaked to the Washington Post that Joe Biden was going to propose a Supreme Court reform that apparently was going to involve term limits for 18-year term limits for Supreme Court justices, as well as a binding ethics program for the Supreme Court. And that was a week or two ago.
And by the way, I think he mentioned that in his speech that he gave earlier this week. Yeah.
He did give it in his sort of farewell speech. He said, I'm gonna fight for Supreme Court reform. And that has not been a feature in Harris's speeches just yet. She's obviously been out in front on the Dobbs ruling and talking about that, and talking about reproductive rights, but she hasn't broached this subject of court reform, which, you know, her predecessor was about to drop. And we did a piece this week, Hassan Kanu did a piece saying that, you know, there are indications back, if you look at her 2020 campaign, but it was all along the lines of her talking about, if you're in California politics, you've heard this a lot from Kamala Harris, where she's talking about, let's have that conversation.
Right.
You know, I'll have the conversation about Supreme Court reform. But, you know, much like what we just talked about, like she'll take a meeting with anyone. She'll take a meeting with any issue, right?
She'll have the damn conversation.
She'll have that conversation, but it's not necessarily the case that she's going to follow through on it. So she has said that in the past, but, you know, I think that's a key question that should probably answer. I think when Biden was getting ready to do that, it was going to put himself and put the Republicans in an interesting position, because the court is very unpopular. The rulings that they've done recently are very unpopular, and tying Republicans to the court is probably a smart political play. So if you say you're going to reform the court and your opposition might take up the opposite position, that the court's fine, that's going to make it look even more political, right? And more like, well, the court's doing the bidding of the Republicans.
And especially when she's trying to hit Trump, especially on, you know, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which is just even more to highlight his, you know, political Supreme Court pick appointees. Yeah,
exactly. So as far as mass incarceration goes, you know, Harris came out in 2009 with a book called Smart on Crime, which was about reducing mass incarceration, along with you know, making sure people who committed criminal offenses were locked up, but you know, looking at nonviolent offenses in a different way. At the time, the sort of context for a lot of this is that California had this massive overcrowding problem in its prisons, and a lot of that was due to parole policy, where if you had a technical parole violation, you would be put back in jail. And there was a lot of recidivism around that. And they were under a court order to reduce their prison population. So, you know, and this goes back to when Jerry Brown actually was the attorney general before Harris. So and Brown was very resistant to this court order, by the way, which was a federal court order. So, you know, what Harris was doing in some ways was trying to abide by that particular statute. And she was fighting it as well in certain contexts. And I think we had Alex Salmon did some stories on that back in 2019. So, you know, that's sort of the background for all this. You know, I think that there's sort of a stereotypical, I'm looking at this person, she's mixed race, she's female, she obviously is liberal, right? That's like the first impression that you're hearing from like pollsters, that you know, she codes liberal. I think it's a crude stereotype, but it's something that I hear.
Yeah.
And that's
what Republicans are hitting her.
That's where Republicans are hitting her.
Yeah.
Also,
radical Democrat.
Also because in the 2020 campaign, she took policies, at least for a minute, that were very, you know, far to the left. She would often reverse herself on those policies, but she said she was for Medicare for all. She said she was for incarcerated people being allowed to vote, and things of that nature. So as far as what she's going to do on mass incarceration policy, I mean, the one thing we can say is that that's more of a state issue. There are obviously things that can be done at the federal level to sort of set standards and be a role model. I don't think she's going to reverse the First Step Act, for example. I think she would see the crack cocaine disparity as a problem that we should even do more to reduce in terms of sentencing. So, you know, I think she's going to run on her record as a prosecutor. She already is. And there's going to be sort of a tough on crime tinge to her approach in the campaign. Now, whether that
because Trump's the opponent,
right? Exactly.
So it's just a very Canadian narrative.
So whether that carries over into her governing, I think remains to be seen.
I just think the Democratic Party as a whole has moved probably the most in this, kind of world of policy on, full marijuana legalization.
Right.
And I think that will probably be that'll be a
we're already
policy for
and we're already moving towards that.
Right.
Even with Biden, who was reluctant to do it.
Yeah.
And I think, there's no reason why it wouldn't continue forward. And that's at least part of the nonviolent offenders who are locked up are for marijuana possession and charges of that nature. So I guess we got about 10 minutes left. We could
VP.
We could maybe do some Veep stakes.
Yeah.
I know that we aren't fully aligned on this, I don't think.
Okay.
But we had a piece this week talking about Tim Walz, and it was written by Ryan Cooper. I'll do the nickel summary for Walz. It seems that the campaign has bought this idea that you have to balance the ticket from a gender and ethnicity standpoint. So if you buy that, and I don't totally buy that, by the way, I don't think it would be necessarily fatal to have 2 women on the ticket or 2 African Americans on the ticket, but clearly it seems like the campaign has bought that, right?
Right.
And so if you've bought that, then you're looking at a bunch of white guys, and most of them from the Midwest, maybe the Southeast. And if you're looking at all those people, what Ryan's piece said, and I tend to agree, Walz is a really, really good choice. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Number one, he had the greatest record in the last several years of any governor in terms of the legislation he was able to get through it with a very small majority in Minnesota.
One vote in the Senate.
One vote Senate majority. And yet he passed, and what he passed, I think this is also important. What he really passed there was kind of a state level version of the things that were left out of the Build Back Better Act, right? And those things, the care economy kind of stuff, where you're talking about elder care, where you're talking about family leave, when you're talking about, in his case, there was a free school lunch policy. These kinds of policies seem to align with the things that Harris, to the extent that she's tipped her hand at all, these are the things she wants to get done in 2025. And so it aligns very well. And then there's, he's been good on TV. He's comes from a small town. He was a football coach.
He's hit Vance really hard.
He's hit Vance hard. Yeah. He's been effective. He can speak to rural issues. He was the ranking member. He spent a long time in Congress, by the way, 12 years in Congress. In the House, and he became the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. So he is a veteran. So he has some bona fides in a lot of places, and I think there's been some weird excitement about a bland looking guy from the Midwest,
a Mayo guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to add one other thing, there's a great pro labor law they passed banning captive audience meetings when employers force workers into meetings to talk about how unions are bad.
Also not perfect, right? I mean, the Mayo Clinic is big in Minnesota, and they took down a nurse staffing rule that he wanted to put together, and he went along with that. There was also an Uber.
So this is I'll throw this out there. I liked him well. I think all these people have they're good parts of their records and some drawbacks. Mm-hmm. My only anti-Walz case is that if one of the top concerns about Harris is how deferential she'll be to Silicon Valley and tech, Walz's first veto as governor was against a bill that they got through this really, tight control in the state legislature that would have set a floor for a minimum wage for Uber drivers.
Right.
And he said, in a kind of a very Harris way, we'll have a conversation about this. We'll form a task force to study it. Maybe in a year, we'll get something together. Uber and Lyft threatened to leave the state if this passed. There was a lot of pressure on him, and he did cave. Now, they did just pass this year. He followed through on his promise. They got a somewhat softer bill. It set
it was a little watered down.
Wage. So he got it done. I'm just, I'm just throwing this out there.
Well, so Give me another. I mean, obviously, we can run down the
Yeah.
names. There's Roy Cupper. It's not Cooper. Sorry. Apologies to Ryan Cooper. It's Roy Cupper, this
I didn't know.
governor from North Carolina. Andy Beshear, governor from Kentucky. Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona,
just came around on the Pro Act.
Who coincidentally, very coincidentally,
yeah,
had nothing to do with the Veep stakes. Josh Shapiro, the governor from Pennsylvania.
That was a big name, yeah.
And probably forgetting some. Maybe Pete Buttigieg. I've heard that name bandied about.
I think that's wish casting.
I think it was kind of hilarious that Admiral McRaven took himself out of the running. Like, what running were you taking yourself out of?
And Mark Cuban.
Mark
Cuban's thrown out.
Mark Cuban's not that's not happening either.
Yeah.
But so give me some of your thoughts on some of these potential.
Well, I mean,
folks.
I think my only frustration with the VP conversation is a lot of this is just like kind of on vibes. I mean, the VP they have, some influence on policy. I'm not underplaying that, but not the most,
I mean, it really depends. It depends on your president.
Yeah.
I mean, some presidents, they're, Dick Cheney was an equal partner, if not above that of George W. Bush. Yeah. Whereas it doesn't look like Biden had much influence on Obama policies.
Right.
It's hard to say with Kamala Harris whether she had much to do with Biden's policies. And certainly Mike Pence had nothing to do, it seems like.
I mean, on foreign policy, when Biden was Obama's VP, he was pushing really hard for the pullout from Afghanistan, and that obviously didn't happen.
Yeah.
And from what we sort of know, because this is the big conversation now about Biden's policy on Gaza, Harris was sort of an early person to suggest that, we want a ceasefire. And that also didn't have, influence. So I think there's limited.
It is limited. And it's also limited in terms of what it actually means politically. I mean, everybody kind of brings up this idea of, if you get Shapiro, that'll help you in that state. And there just isn't a lot of actual evidence that a vice president brings a state with them or even a region.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that's the main case for, Shapiro that people are making. Just it's gonna be probably harder for Harris to win the Rust Belt states, and you might want someone from one of those.
Let's go with this last question here. It's from Tori. It says Gaza is the #1 issue for many young people. Will Harris put serious pressure on Israel to stop the genocide? So yesterday or 2 days ago, I guess, Netanyahu spoke before a joint session of Congress. Harris, normally the vice president, as the president of the Senate, would preside over that joint session. She did not appear. Yesterday, she met with Netanyahu. The reporting out of that was that Netanyahu wasn't happy with that meeting. And then she gave a press conference where I don't know that the policy was so different, but the tone was certainly different.
You buy that?
I think the tone was different.
Okay.
I think she's in a tough spot. I think the best analogy here is 1968, right? So Hubert Humphrey, who's the sitting vice president, is the nominee after the president drops out of the race. Foreign policy is a major issue. Vietnam is a major issue. There's a significant anti-war faction that wants Humphrey to break with LBJ on Vietnam. And he's the sitting vice president. And it's just rare that you have a vice president differ with the president and the administration on a policy issue.
Right.
And they kept wanting Humphrey to do it. And about a week before the election, Humphrey says, yeah, we should end the bombing in Vietnam. And the legend is that if he did that a week earlier, he probably would have won. And so Harris is in almost the same spot with regards to Gaza. She's going to have to maneuver to make as clear as possible what her intentions are. I don't think that she can finesse that. She might be able to finesse some domestic policy stuff, like this Lena Khan thing, maybe. Right. I don't think she's going to be able to finesse the Gaza issue between now and November.
Yeah, I know that her press team really wants her to move and be more outspoken for a ceasefire in Gaza. They keep leaking out to press members that, there's a change behind the scene. But I think there's just a lot of cross pressures. And again, I'll just remind her that like a lot of Democrats have spoken at every AIPAC conference when she was in the Senate. You know,
Yeah,
he has
I mean,
deep
there's
ties. Yeah.
yes,
But
apparently ties to Herzog,
Yeah.
who's the current president, I believe, of Israel, but is not a Likud. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be that. I think in particular is going to be really fascinating to see over the next few months. I think some people on the left were okay with that, and then with her speech, with her press event. Other people really didn't like the press release she gave about the protests at Union Station, where she really condemned the protesters. So, once again, it's like kind of a cipher. You see what you want to see. Okay, we are wrapped up. Great conversation. Thank you for being in the house.
Yeah. This is as professional as it gets.
This is podcasting. I mean, you can't beat this, people. This is a very professional podcast. And we will see you. We are here every Friday at 12:30 Eastern. We're going to post this on the web, and you'll be able to watch it this weekend. And Luke Goldstein, writing fellow, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely.
Repeat guest.
Yeah, first time, long time.
Yeah.
And we'll see you later. Thanks a lot.